Now we are looking into theories in anthropology. A few examples include functionalism, structural functionalism, idealist, and materialist. So over the years, there have been many different theories or schools of thought about culture, how to study culture, and anthropology. And some of these have gone out of favor. Some of these have been integrated into the way anthropologists work now. And here we go. So we could divide all social scientists, or at least all cultural anthropologists, into two categories. And these are very broad generalizations, but two things to think about: the idealist perspective and the materialist perspective. The idealist perspective is a theoretical approach stressing the primacy of superstructure, like ideas and values, in cultural research and analysis. The materialist perspective stresses the primacy of infrastructure or material conditions in cultural research and analysis. So I just divided into two different main categories, idealist or materialist, and it's okay to be both. There isn't necessarily a strong division between those two in anthropology. An anthropologist can take from either of those, but that's just one way to look at different paradigms, or two examples of different paradigms. For example, do people develop cultural traits because of their infrastructure, or because of their ideals, or religions, or worldviews? We're moving on to more theoretical paradigms or philosophical frameworks, and we're kind of going chronologically, and you'll see that in the lesson. So over time, anthropology has had many fathers and mothers. Your book will go through many historic anthropologists or anthropologists of the past and the different ideas that they came up with, and I will outline several here in this lesson. So again, to describe what a theory in ethnography is, or an ethnographic theory, this is not the same as a scientific theory, like the theory of natural selection or the theory of evolution by natural selection. These paradigms are schools of thought, and what they can do is that they are ways of framing a research question, ways of understanding a project, ways of analyzing your data, ways of understanding the implications of your results, and they don't have to be A, B, either or. Sometimes the best anthropological studies incorporate perspectives from multiple paradigms or theories. So here is an example of one very old-fashioned and out-of-date way to look at culture, or to understand how cultures change over time. This would have been an early question that anthropologists would have asked. How do cultures change? Why are cultures different? Why do some cultures appear to be developed differently than others? So one early explanation for this was unilinear evolutionism, which was founded by Lewis Henry Morgan and Sir Edward Tyler. It assumes that there is one line or path through which all societies evolve, from savagery to barbarism to civilization. So it would assume that some societies that we will encounter will still be in the savagery stage or the barbarism stage. Obviously, those are patronizing and disrespectful and outdated ways to look at other cultures, but this is just one example of the way that anthropologists viewed culture, like the framework from within culture was viewed. Another theory was historical particularism. It argued that there is no single preordained path for societies. A given cultural feature could arise due to many reasons. What appears to be the same feature in three different societies could have been three completely different histories and explanations behind them. So it kind of emphasized looking at historical context. And it also emphasizes the fact that cultures can borrow. They're not all on some sort of straight arrow. They can borrow from other cultures. This is called diffusion. As cultural traits diffuse, they develop their particular histories. Historical particularism was based on the idea that each element of culture had its own distinctive history, and that social forms that may look similar were far from identical because of their different histories. So the take-home message with historical particularism is that one must look at the history or background of a culture instead of making comparisons or generalizations. Functionalism is another theory or paradigm, it wasn't as concerned with the culture's origins, evolution, or history, but was focused on the role of cultural traits in current societies. One famous functionalist, Bronislaw Malinowski, was a functionalist in two senses. He believed that all customs and institutions in a society were integrated and interrelated, so that if one changed, others would as well. So each custom or institution was a function of another. Therefore, you could begin anywhere in a culture and eventually get to the rest of the culture because all the aspects are connected. Secondly, Malinowski believed that humans had a set of universal biological needs and that customs developed to meet those needs. The function of any practice was the role it played in satisfying those universal biological needs, such as food, sex, shelter, and so on. Malinowski is the subject of probably your Module 3 video, depending on which class you are taking. Another functionalist was Radcliffe Brown. Like Malinowski, he focused less on evolutionary or diffusionist statements on culture. He focused on the role that particular practices play in the life of societies today. He advocated that instead of assuming a historical path, that societies should be studied in the present context. Therefore, anthropology should be synchronic, studying societies at one time, rather than diachronic, studying societies over time or through time. Kind of like synchronous and asynchronous in online classes. Structural functionism is associated with Radcliffe Brown and Evans Pritchard. Evans Pritchard is famous for his studies of the Nuer and the Azande, who we might study later in the semester. According to structural functionalism, customs or cultural practices function to preserve social structure. For example, witchcraft, a belief system, exists among the Azande for social control and to maintain social and political order. Therefore, any deviation from the normal customs, practices, and behavior would damage the system of culture. So contemporary functionalism states that there are social and cultural systems and their elements are functionally related to one another. So when one part changes, the other also changes. Some elements, such as the economic ones, are more important than others. For example, significant economic changes, such as increasing rates of cash employment among women, can lead to changes in family and household organization, as well as the average age of women at marriage and frequency of divorce. So think about how women going back into the workforce could influence other aspects of society and culture. This is a big word, configurationalism. Configurationalism, like functionalism, sees culture as integrated. It states that cultures are patterned and many traits or practices do not fit with certain cultures. Margaret Mead did her work called Patterns of Culture and Coming of Age in Samoa. She studied adolescence in Samoa and discovered that aspects of Samoan adolescence, which we would have thought in the Western world were biologically determined, were actually culturally determined. So culture can influence and determine endless aspects of human nature, like gender roles, stages of life, and personality traits. Therefore, culture, not biology, determines human nature. And this is called cultural determinism. Cultural determinism. Another theory is neo-evolutionism. This kind of goes back and reminds me a little bit of unilinear evolution, but it's a new take on the way cultures evolve. In the 1950s, anthropologists became more interested in culture change and evolution. After all, this concept is so important to biology, why not culture as well? So they took what had been learned about evolution and started applying it to culture. And so neo-evolutionism states that we can see the evolution of human culture from the Paleolithic Old Stone Age times to the present. And obviously, culture has changed. This neo-evolutionism kind of stated a pattern that societies go from foraging to horticulture and pastoralism to agriculture and then industrialization. So this is the new pattern proposed by neo-evolutionism. As well as the changes in subsistence, which is what we were talking about earlier. Subsistence is the way that societies get their food. Social organization and political organization changes as well, from bands to tribes to chiefdoms to states. Julian Stewart proposed this multilinear evolution, showing how cultures have followed several different evolutionary paths. He also pioneered ecological anthropology, which investigates the relationships between environmental variables and cultures. So anthropology today uses a lot of these terms, like bands, tribes, chiefdoms, and states. We're not proposing, though, as a field, that all societies go through these stages. These are just aspects of neo-evolutionism, some terms and definitions that we kept in anthropology to understand different social and political organization. Related, Marvin Harris proposed cultural materialism. So this is related a little bit to neo-evolutionism. For Marvin Harris, he stated that all societies have an infrastructure, a social structure, and a superstructure. So he proposed the barrel model that I use as a teaching tool often in my classes. I don't make the same statements about these aspects of culture that Marvin Harris did, but I do like the way the barrel model organizes different aspects of culture. So in his final analysis, he concluded that infrastructure determines structure and superstructure. He, along with other materialists, took issue with idealists who argued for the prominent role of religion in changing society. Structuralism, proponent of structuralism is Claude Lévi-Strauss, or was, who focused on the structures of kinship and marriage systems, aimed at discovering relations, themes, and connections within cultures. So within social structure, there are different institutions like marriage systems. He proposed, or structuralism proposes, that all humans have common mental features that lead us to think similarly in different backgrounds and cultures. So we all have a need to classify people and things and ideas into categories. For example, folk tales among many different societies have recurring themes, like good and evil, old and young, black and white, high and low. Moving on to anthropology today. Today it focuses on the 4, sometimes 5, fields of anthropology, but you'll find that different scholars within anthropology become increasingly specialized. Evolutionary paradigms still dominate biological anthropology and remain strong in archaeology, but ethnography has grown more specialized, with cultural anthropologists heading into the field with very specific topics and questions in mind.